There's a moment in every marriage when you realize the person sleeping beside you has become a stranger. Not because they changed overnight, but because you stopped looking closely enough to notice when the change began. My name is Craig Price. I'm 44 years old. I spent 14 years building a life I believed in, a home, 2 children, a marriage I thought was solid as bedrock. And it took me less than 40 minutes, reading messages I was never supposed to see, to understand that everything I trusted had already been quietly dismantled. This is the story of how I found out, how I responded, and how I made sure, when the moment came, I was the one who was ready. I'm a mortgage underwriter at Pinnacle Lending Group in Charlotte, North Carolina. 11 years in the same office. My job is simple in theory and brutal in practice. I read numbers until they tell me the truth. I find the lie buried inside a balance sheet. I spot the anomaly hiding in plain sight. People trust me with their biggest financial decisions because I don't flinch from what the data says. I follow the evidence, not the emotion. Turns out, I was far better at reading other people's finances than I ever was at reading my own marriage. The foundation. Alison and I met in our late 20s at a charity auction. I remember the exact moment I saw her. She was laughing at something her friend whispered, completely at ease in a room full of strangers, radiating the kind of warmth that doesn't perform. It just exists. We dated 2 years. Married at 29. And for the next 14, we built what I genuinely believed was a good life. Our son Mason just turned 13, the age where he'd rather die than admit he still looks for me at his baseball games. Our daughter Zoe is 10, and already the most opinionated person in any room she enters. I adore them both with a fierceness I didn't know I was capable of until they existed. Alison ran the design side of a mid-size interior design firm called Studio. She'd made partner 3 years ago, and I was proud of her. Genuinely. She had a rare gift, the ability to walk into an empty space and see what it wanted to become. Her clients loved her. What I didn't know was that her firm had recently taken on a corporate wellness consulting contract. And the consultant in question was a man named Todd Archer. The first red flag. I first heard his name in November, somewhere between Thanksgiving and the first snowfall. Alison mentioned him the way you mention a coworker. Casually. Briefly. Like the name meant nothing at all. Todd suggested a different layout for the Henderson project. Todd had an idea about incorporating biophilic elements. Todd. I didn't think much of it. People talk about their colleagues. That's normal. That's just work. By January, Todd had made it to the dinner table. He'd recommended a new yoga studio downtown. He had a contact at a sustainable furniture supplier. And slowly, in the way I noticed things at the office, clinical, detached, I began to observe something. She said his name the same way every time. Just a little too easily. Like she'd been practicing keeping it neutral. I filed it away. Mason had a baseball showcase. Zoe was preparing her science fair project. I was buried in a complex commercial refinancing case. Life was loud and full. It was easy to dismiss a name. Then came the evening in late January when everything shifted. A closing fell through. I was home by 4:30, 2 hours early. The house was quiet. Alison wasn't back yet. I set my bag on the counter and reached past her laptop for my phone charger. The screen was still glowing. I wasn't looking at it. I was reaching past it. But one line of text caught my eye before I could look away. I keep thinking about yesterday. Tell me you feel it, too. The name at the top of the message thread was Todd Archer. I straightened up slowly. My hand had stopped moving. I stood there, the refrigerator humming behind me like nothing in the world had changed, and I stared at those words for what felt like a full minute. I didn't open the laptop. I walked to the living room, sat down in my chair, and stared at the wall. In my line of work, one anomalous number doesn't prove fraud. But it tells you exactly where to look. And once you start looking with purpose, the picture almost always gets far uglier than that first red flag suggested. I was already looking. I just didn't know yet how ugly it was going to get. Overnight, the plan. I gave myself one night. One night to let the shock settle into something I could actually work with. I made dinner. Helped Zoe with her math homework. Listened to Mason complain about his history teacher. Went to bed at my usual time. Allison fell asleep beside me like she always did. And I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind already sorting through everything the way I sort through a lone file. Methodically. Without emotion. Looking for the pattern underneath the surface. By morning, I had a plan. The 40 minutes that changed everything. I waited until the kids were on the school bus and Allison had left for work. Then I sat at the kitchen counter with a fresh cup of coffee and opened her laptop. I want to be clear about something. In 20 years of adult life, I had never once invaded Allison's privacy. Not her phone. Not her email. Not her journal when she used to keep one. I believed in trust the way some men believe in religion, completely, without requiring proof. What I was doing now felt like stepping off a cliff. But I'd already seen the ground rushing up at me. I needed to know how far the fall was going to be. The message thread with Todd Archer loaded instantly. She hadn't even closed it. I read everything. It took 40 minutes. 6 weeks of messages, maybe longer on her phone. The laptop only showed what had synced through a shared account app she'd forgotten was connected. The early messages were careful. Professional. With just enough warmth to be deniable. Around the third week, something shifted. The language changed. The distance collapsed. By the most recent messages, there was nothing deniable about any of it. But what stopped me cold wasn't the affection. It was a message from Allison. 3 Sundays ago. Sent at 11:14 in the morning, while I was outside in the yard raking leaves with Mason. He's a good man, but he doesn't see me anymore. I feel invisible in my own house. You're the first person in years who's actually listened. I read that line 4 times. Each time it landed differently. The first time, it just hurt. The second time, something hardened behind my sternum. The third time, I started thinking about every conversation we'd had in the past year. Every dinner. Every weekend. Every moment I thought we were fine. The fourth time, I understood exactly what she had done. She hadn't just had an emotional affair. She had handed Todd Archer a key to my marriage by telling him where the lock was weak. She'd mapped the interior of our relationship. Catalogued my blind spots. Named my failures. And handed him the blueprint. That, more than anything else, was the betrayal I couldn't get past. If you're just joining us, my name is Craig Price. My wife Allison had been exchanging messages with a man named Todd Archer. Messages that made very clear this was no longer just a professional relationship. I'd read them. I'd sat with that knowledge for one cold, quiet night. And now, I was done sitting. I was building a case. The legal move. First call, Bill Garrett, an attorney who'd handled some estate work for my parents 3 years back. I didn't tell him everything. Just enough. I asked about documentation. About what was admissible in family court in North Carolina. About custody frameworks. He told me to start keeping records and to avoid anything that could be characterized as hostile or retaliatory. I wrote down every word he said. Second, I spent 2 hours reviewing our joint financial accounts. Not looking for anything specific, but if Allison had been distracted for 6 weeks, I wanted to know if that distraction had touched our money. What I found surprised me. 3 transfers over the past month. Each around $800. To an account I didn't recognize. The description read, ELR Consulting LLC. I wrote down the account number. Circled it twice. Said nothing. That evening, Allison came home at 6:30 and started talking about a client presentation. I listened. Responded normally. When she reached past me for a glass of water, our hands briefly occupied the same space. And I felt absolutely nothing. Which told me that the part of me that had once loved her without question was already standing behind a wall. The confrontation. 4 more days. 4 days of school runs, baseball practice, dinner at the table, helping Mason with geography homework, watching Zoe perform elaborate dramatic retellings of recessed drama. 4 days of sleeping beside a woman I no longer recognized. On the 5th evening, I arranged for Mason and Zoe to sleep at my mother's house. I told her I had a work situation that needed my full attention. She didn't press. She just said she'd make pancakes in the morning. When I got home, Allison's car was in the driveway. She was in the kitchen unloading groceries, heels still on, jacket still buttoned. The physical version of a woman who hadn't switched off from the day yet. She smiled at me over her shoulder. "Where are the kids?" "At my mom's," I said, setting my keys on the counter. I thought we needed some time to talk. The way she stilled, just slightly, for half a second, told me everything about her conscience. She recovered fast. But not fast enough. We sat across from each other at the table we'd bought at an estate sale 12 years ago. The window above the sink we'd argued about replacing for 3 years. The refrigerator covered in Zoe's drawings. 14 years of shared life between us. I kept my voice completely level. "Do you love him?" Allison set her hands flat on the table slowly, like she was steadying herself. "Love who?" "Todd." The color left her face in a single wave. Her mouth opened, closed. The kitchen was completely silent, just the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower somewhere down the block. After 14 years of marriage, 2 children. She couldn't even deny it. "Craig." "Just answer it," I said. "You owe me that much." Her eyes filled. She looked down at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's complicated." "It's not," I answered. "It's the simplest question I've ever asked you." The hour that followed. What followed was an hour I won't reconstruct in full. Not because I can't remember it, I remember every word. But because some things don't need to be turned into a performance. She admitted it. Said she hadn't planned it. That it started as a professional connection and grew into something she hadn't known how to stop. That she was confused. That she still cared about me. She said a lot of things people say when they're trying to soften the edges of what they've done. What she didn't do was tell me about the messages. About how she'd handed Todd Archer a guided tour of my weaknesses. Painted me as a man too distracted to see his wife. I kept that card face down. I asked her to stay at her sister's for a while. She looked like she wanted to argue. But something in my face told her this wasn't a negotiation. She packed a bag. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and said she was sorry. "I know you are," I told her. "And I mean it. Sorry doesn't rebuild what's gone. But I mean it." After she left, I stood in the quiet house for a long time. Then I called Bill Garrett and left a message that I was ready to proceed formally. Todd shows up. 3 days later, on a Saturday afternoon while Mason was at practice and Zoe was at a birthday party 2 streets over, I heard a car pull up in front of the house. A black SUV, newer model. Parking with the kind of deliberate care that told me the driver had thought about this moment more than once. Todd Archer was taller than I'd expected. 40, maybe. Groomed confidence. Pressed chinos. Fitted pullover. The whole curated package of a man who wanted to look casual but had tried too hard to get there. He walked toward me at a measured pace. Raised one hand, a wave, or maybe a peace offering. I didn't move. He stopped about 6 feet away. "Craig, I know this isn't what you want, but I needed to talk to you man to man. You're standing in my driveway. Talk." He took a breath. Said he wasn't my enemy. Said that Allison had come to him. That she'd told him things about our marriage that made him believe she was in a bad situation. What kind of situation? "She told me you were controlling," he said, his voice dropping like he was confiding something painful. "That you monitored her finances. Isolated her from her friends. That there had been times when she felt genuinely afraid in this house." He paused. I thought I was helping her. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. A cardinal landed on the fence post at the edge of the yard and sat there like a small red witness. "So let me make sure I understand. Allison told you I was abusive. And your response was to have an affair with her. Something moved across his face. A flicker of something that wasn't quite certainty anymore. I was trying to. To what? I cut in, my voice still level. Save her from a house where she was a partner in a thriving business? Where her children were safe and healthy? Where every bill was paid and every vacation was planned? That's what you were saving her from. He shifted his weight. I only knew what she told me. And you didn't think to question it. I took one step forward, not threatening, just closing the distance to something that couldn't be avoided. You didn't think it was worth a second look before you decided to walk into another man's marriage. You just believed what was convenient to believe, because it made what you wanted to do feel justified. Todd opened his mouth. Closed it again. For a man who made his living coaching people through difficult conversations, he was doing a remarkably poor job of navigating this one. Here's what I want you to understand, I said. My children live in this house. Whatever story Allison told you, my kids are not part of your narrative. They are not a reason. They are not a justification. And they are not going to know your name for any reason other than the one they'll eventually figure out on their own. I stepped back toward the garage. We're done here. Don't come back. He stood there a few more seconds, that rehearsed composure fully gone, looking like a man who had arrived expecting a very different scene. Then he walked back to his SUV and drove away. I watched the car turn the corner. Then I went inside and called Bill Garrett. Zoe's card. The weeks that followed settled into a strange new shape. The alarm still went off at 6:15. Mason still needed his cleats found. Zoe still wanted her hair braided a specific way I was slowly, badly learning to do. Life didn't pause out of courtesy for my grief. I told the kids that Mom and I were going through a rough patch and needed some space. Mason nodded in that particular way 13-year-old boys nod when they're processing something they don't want to fully acknowledge. Zoe asked 3 questions. Was it her fault? Were we getting divorced? Would she still see Grandma Gloria? And I answered all 3 honestly and without hedging. No. I don't know yet. Absolutely yes. She accepted that. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. But they're also sharper than we want to believe. Which is why what happened one Friday afternoon nearly undid me entirely. Zoe came home from school carrying a handmade card. She had a gift for them, elaborate borders, her particular style of block lettering. She set it on the kitchen counter while I was making dinner, and I assumed it was for me or for Mason. I glanced at it while stirring a pot of pasta. The front read, "For Todd. From Zoe. Thank you for the art kit." I turned the heat down on the stove. I read it again. Inside her careful 10-year-old handwriting, Mom said you picked it out yourself. It has the good color pencils. You're really nice. I stood there holding that card for a long time. Allison had allowed Todd Archer to send my daughter a gift. Not a generic thing. An art kit, chosen specifically because Zoe loved to draw. He knew that detail because Allison had told him. He had been gathering information about my children the way a man does when he's planning to be part of their lives. I set the card face down on the counter. Finished making dinner. Got through the evening. That night, after the kids were asleep, I called Bill Garrett. Document the gift. Document the card. Bring everything to our meeting next week. This speaks to intent. Whose intent? I asked. Both of theirs, he replied. The financial discovery. 2 weeks into our separation, I traced the ELR Consulting LLC payments I'd spotted earlier. The LLC was registered in Delaware, minimal public disclosure, but the registered agent address matched the co-working space where Todd Archer's wellness consulting firm operated. 3 payments. $800 each. $2,400 total, moved out of our joint household account over 6 weeks. Allison had been quietly funneling marital money toward Todd Archer's business under the guise of a consulting arrangement. Whether that was emotional generosity or something more calculated, I couldn't say yet. But it was marital money. And she hadn't mentioned a word of it. I photographed every record, forwarded everything to Bill Garrett, and said nothing to Allison. Not yet. Harriet's revelation. Spring arrived in Charlotte with that particular southern urgency, one week grey and cold, the next suddenly green and full of birds. I barely noticed. My attention was elsewhere. By late March, we'd filed for divorce and submitted a formal custody petition citing marital waste, the ELR transfers, the pattern of behavior that had compromised the children's stability. Then came the industry lunch that changed everything. Harriet Colton, senior partner at a commercial lending firm I worked with regularly, leaned across the table during dessert and lowered her voice. I want to mention something. Professional courtesy. I set down my coffee. Todd Archer. My firm used his wellness consulting services for about 4 months last year. We terminated the contract in December. The results he billed us for didn't match the deliverables we received. We were charged for team sessions that never happened. Expense invoices included line items for materials we never saw. She paused. I moved on quietly because the amounts didn't justify litigation. But when I heard through the grapevine that your wife worked with him, I wanted you to know. I kept my expression neutral. But something cold and clear was settling behind my eyes. Did you document it? Enough, Harriet replied. If you ever needed it. The forensic accountant. That evening, I pulled up everything I had on ELR Consulting LLC and looked at it with entirely new eyes. The payments from our household account weren't just marital waste. They were potentially connected to a pattern of fraudulent billing that Todd Archer had been running across multiple clients. Allison either knew about it and participated, or she'd been manipulated into transferring money by a man who knew exactly how to make requests feel reasonable. Either scenario was damaging to her position in family court. I hired a forensic accountant by the end of the week, a compact, precise woman named Linda Cho who operated out of a one-person firm in Raleigh. She spent 10 days going through ELR Consulting LLC's registration records, cross-referenced against our payment history and Harriet's account. What she brought back to our meeting was a spreadsheet that told a story anyone could follow. Todd Archer had been billing multiple corporate clients for wellness consulting services that were either never delivered or significantly misrepresented. Harriet's firm was one case. Linda had found 2 more, a property management company in Durham, a mid-sized dental group in Raleigh. Both had terminated contracts with ELR Consulting within the past 18 months. It's a low-friction fraud structure, Linda explained. He keeps the per-client exposure below the threshold where most businesses bother with litigation. But across a sufficient number of clients, the total is significant. What's the exposure? Conservatively, north of $80,000 across documented cases. Possibly more if additional clients surface. She paused. The transfers from your joint account fit the same pattern. A modest amount framed as a consulting fee. No verifiable service delivery. The license suspension. I didn't file a complaint myself. I didn't need to. Harriet Colton, once I shared what Linda had found, decided that 3 documented cases constituted sufficient grounds to take to the North Carolina Business Court. Her firm's attorney made the filing on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, Todd Archer's consulting license was under review. The news reached me through a brief text from Harriet. Filed yesterday. Expect suspension of his license within 30 days pending review. Thought you'd want to know. I read it standing in the parking lot of Mason's school, waiting to pick him up from practice. I put my phone in my pocket and watched the team jog off the field. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was closer to the feeling you get when a long, difficult audit finally closes. Not celebration exactly, but the quiet recognition that the numbers have told their truth. And the appropriate people now know what they are. Mason climbed into the passenger seat, dropped his bag, and looked at me with those careful, assessing eyes that had started to remind me uncomfortably of my own. "You okay, Dad?" "Good day," I replied. And I meant it. Mason connects the dots. That same week, while I was checking Mason's homework, he looked up from his textbook. "Dad, is Mom's situation at work connected to why you two split up?" "Why do you ask?" Jason's dad said something about Todd Archer's company being in some kind of trouble. He kept his eyes on mine. 13 years old. I had genuinely underestimated him. "I'm not going to lie to you," I said. "There are things happening that are being handled through the right channels. What I can tell you is that none of it is your problem to carry. Mason nodded slowly, then went back to his textbook. I sat with that for a long time after he went to bed. My son was connecting dots I hadn't even finished drawing, which meant I needed to move faster than I'd thought. Gloria calls. That weekend, the phone rang. It was Gloria, Allison's mother, a woman who didn't call without purpose. Her voice was measured, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. Craig, I owe you a conversation I should have initiated weeks ago. I sat down at the kitchen table. I knew something was wrong before you did, she admitted. Allison mentioned Todd's name in January in a way that was different from how she mentioned colleagues. I should have said something to her directly. I should have called you. I didn't do either, and I'm sorry for that. Gloria, you're not responsible for what Allison chose. No, she agreed, but I could have made it harder for her to keep choosing it. A pause. Those children need their father. I want you to know that I'll say exactly that to anyone who needs to hear it, including a judge. After we hung up, I sat at the table for a long while. The house was quiet. Zoe was drawing at her desk upstairs. Mason was in his room with his headphones on. The ordinary sounds of their evening drifted down the hallway like something I wanted to hold onto with both hands. I had Gloria in my corner. I had the financial documentation. I had a forensic accountant's report, a license suspension in progress, and a family court date set. The man who had spent 14 years assuming the best about the people closest to him, who had believed in trust the way some men believe in religion, had learned, at 44, to verify before he trusted. Not because the world had broken him, but because his children were watching, and they deserved a father who showed them what it looked like to stand up, stay clear-headed, and do the right thing, even when everything else was falling apart. Closing. Channel call to action. If this story moved you, if you found yourself leaning in, holding your breath, feeling something, you're not alone. Thousands of people are living through versions of this story right now. Stories of betrayal, of rebuilding, of quiet dignity in the face of devastating loss. Stories that don't always make headlines, but matter more than anything you'll see trending today. This channel exists for those stories. If you want to hear more real, emotional, human stories told with honesty and depth, subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss one. Leave a comment below and tell us, what part of Craig's story hit you the hardest? Was it the messages on the laptop? Todd showing up at the door? Or Zoe's handmade card? Your comments matter. They help us tell better stories. They help other people feel less alone. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Life lesson. Final 60 seconds. Before we close, a word about what Craig's story really teaches us. It isn't about revenge. It isn't about winning. It's about this. When life betrays you, your greatest asset is your clarity. Craig didn't spiral. He didn't beg. He didn't perform his pain for sympathy. He assessed. He documented. He protected what mattered most. And he did it all while braiding his daughter's hair, standing at a cold fence watching his son play baseball, and making sure both of his children still had a home worth coming back to. The lesson isn't trust no one. The lesson is, know your worth clearly enough that you recognize when someone has stopped honoring it. Love people fully. But love yourself enough to see the truth when it's sitting right in front of you. And when the truth is ugly, face it with your eyes open, your mind sharp, and your children's future firmly in view. Because that is what strength actually looks like. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.